Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Neil Waite. I'm the Head of Environmental Sciences at HS2, and I'm joined in this session with Daniel Marsh from Imperial College London. And during this part, we'll be talking about the series of innovation projects we've done at HS2, all with the aim of reducing our dependency on diesel. Now, cutting carbon is one of the priorities at HS2, and indeed it forms part of our strategic business case, as well as creating more capacity and better connectivity. Cutting carbon in operation, of course, involves providing a low carbon railway, plus the modal shift of creating capacity on the existing railway to get hauliers off the road and internal domestic flights. But for the sake of this presentation, we'll focus on how reducing carbon specifically in the construction of HS2. So the backbone to this is our carbon management system, and some of you may recognise the graphic on the screen. It's taken from PAS 2080, the global carbon management standard. HS2 was the first major infrastructure project to adopt PAS 2080, and indeed so was all of our joint ventures on phase one. And it provides that continual improvement cycle of setting targets. So on phase one, we've set all contractors the target to reduce their carbon by 50%. A monitoring process, we've set baselines for phase one in each of our phases and for each contract within each phases. And then that monitoring comes back to HS2 and we publicly report in our annual sustainability report, which the first one was published last September, our progress against that overall 50% target. So for example, at the moment, we're about halfway towards that as we start the second year of main works construction. Out of interest, the phase one, which is caused Birmingham to London, part of the route that shows the carbon footprint, and that is not only the design, the construction, but 120 years of operation. And if we just show the material version of that, you'll see that, especially during the construction phase, the three big real heavy hitters are concrete, steel, and diesel. So in January this year, to extend the existing 50% commitment we already made on phase one, we published our environmental sustainability vision. Now this sets out 3 new commitments around carbon, plus 2 around biodiversity. So for carbon, HS2 is committed that from day one of operation, we will use zero carbon electricity. So that is not only the trains we run, but the stations and the buildings we run. As a company, HS2 Limited will be net zero from 2025. That's our offices and our business travel. And the big commitment around construction is that from 2035, all our construction will be net zero. From a biodiversity point of view, we've committed to 10% net gain on phase 2B and to seek more net gain wins on phase 1 and phase 2A. And there's comparative plans for both of these. So for example, at the end of this year, we'll be publishing a biodiversity action plan. And indeed, in January, at the same time we published the vision, we published our own net zero carbon plan. And that's available on our website for everyone to look at it. And it sets out in more detail a series of milestones and series of actions of how we plan over the next 10 years to get to that net gain stage. So for example, during this first year of implementation, there's quite an internal focus on that. We need to embed carbon management further across the whole business, the same way we have for health and safety. So the plan is owned by the CEO, the board, and the executive. We are currently developing directorate team plans across the business, because HS2 operating as a client for the joint ventures on the ground, what can we do better to free up those contractors and that supply chain to receive better outcomes? Our staff are being carbon literacy trained, and the targets within the plan are being submitted this year to the Science Based Targets Initiative run by the UN Race to Zero. We've also got a series of milestones. So we committed this year to have our first diesel-free site, and indeed to be diesel-free on all of our sites from 2029. We've got commitments about reducing CO2 from HGV, so that's the vehicles coming to and from our sites. And in relation to concrete and steel, the concrete and steel we use from 2030 will have a 50% carbon reduction compared to those used in 2021. So, as I said, the 3 real big issues for HS2 and the construction industry as a whole, of course, as you heard today, is concrete, steel and diesel. So in relation to diesel, we've got a series of plans in place to accelerate all the innovations we're already doing. We're all aware that the price of diesel has gone up. And of course, there was the red diesel tariff tax removal in April, an incentive to encourage moving away from diesel. So although that gives a short-term pressure in relation to cost, it does create an opportunity to look closer and look now at the alternatives that are available and to look at them as the whole life cost. So not only the higher cost, but the operational cost, as well as, of course, the other benefits, such as carbon reduction, community benefits of reduced emissions, and staff welfare, occupational health benefits. So we're working closer with government bodies. HS2, of course, can't do this alone. Although we're the biggest project, we're still not big enough to change the industry ourselves. We need to work with all the other partners out there. We're working a lot closer with what we call the arm's length bodies, so the other spin-offs from Department of Transport, so Network Rail, Highways England, etc. And then it's also important that these arm's length bodies and ourselves, we don't just work in isolation and start duplicating the trials of each other. So that's why we're trying to coordinate better across ourselves, but also link into the key industrial route maps. So, for example, the Construction Leadership Council, through their Construct Zero initiative, have developed 5 sprints for this year, and one of them is to develop a elimination of diesel from construction route map. So HS2 are involved in that, and we expect by the end of summer to have that industry route map published, and then it's a case of what HS2 and other projects can do to contribute towards that. And this is about stimulating the supply chain, looking at what's available now, and the innovations we do, and that's why we have the likes of Dan Marsh and other universities working with us. So when we trial something on our side, we're actually looking to trial it to see if it can work for the whole construction industry. So that's why we bring in an academic partner so they can do a study to see what the whole life benefits of that are. Can we take a prototype, bring it onto one of our sites the moment it's available, prove it works in construction, and then prove to the wider construction industry that it's available now and will bring those benefits and shrink that gap from prototype to site rollout. We're also doing other work with the Construction Leadership Council and the Sustainability Supply Chain School. There's also easy wins here. You know, anti-idling, the construction plant has an average of 35 to 50% idling. So we're doing a series of toolkits we're going to make available for the whole industry. That film has already been done on site and they're being created. I will now very quickly show you some photographs before I pass over to Daniel. So we have indeed actually issued about a month ago a press release signaling we've had our first diesel-free site this year. On the screen now are some of the zero emission alternatives. These are all photographs from our site. So there's top left is a 250-ton crawler crane, telehandlers, other construction machinery, solar panels, etc. We also have a series of low emission alternatives on our sites. So welfare cabins usually run by diesel generator. So the top left is solar roof with hydrogen engine. The middle one is solar roof with clean air gas engine. We are trialling a series of HGV dual fuel vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell generators, hydrogen tower lights. If you've been to Euston Station for the last few years, you'll have seen all the walkways are powered by hydrogen tower lights. And also a series of efficiencies, so hybrid equipment, equipment that stores energy from generators that could be used later on, and efficiency management systems, plus also innovative types of piling that create more waste in the first instance. So I'll now pass over to Dan Marsh, who's going to talk in some more detail about some of those trials that he and the Centre for Low Emission Construction have helped on ourselves to build some case studies. Daniel.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks for that introduction, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you all this afternoon. Very briefly, just a quick introduction to the Centre of Low Emission Construction. We form part of the School of Public Health at Imperial College London. where we carry out lots of research working with the construction industry to kind of draw together that connection between air pollution, carbon emissions, and the impact on public health. So the work programs that we're running with HS2 are really, really important. We're obviously giving academic support, but these programs, although they're being led by HS2, are going to have that wider impact across the UK construction industry for longer term. So all that new learning, that new knowledge that we're gaining is being openly shared. Very much we're about going out there, carrying out these trials, having very high quality research, working with the infrastructure projects, the machine manufacturers, the engine manufacturers, and then producing that independent scientific evidence that the policymakers can actually use it to develop future policy within this area, and of course that will lead to carbon reductions in the future. Next slide, please. I think there's a bit of lag there. So part of what I wanted to do this afternoon in the few minutes that we've got together is talk about that roadmap to net zero. We've got the government targets, we've got dates we need to achieve this by, and there's still a huge amount of uncertainty about how to actually get there. And I guess the best way to break it down is that there are stepping stone technologies. There's things that are here available now that will start to give you some of those carbon reduction benefits. And there are things that are slightly further down the line as emerging technologies, where we need more infrastructure development around delivery of these. And I just wanted to talk about a few of the trials that we've been running with HS2. And as you can see on the slide there, we've been testing alternative fuels. So this is looking at alternative liquid fuels, the instant drop-in replacements as an alternative to diesel, and they're readily available today for now. So there are some immediate solutions, but obviously what we want as we move towards that net zero or total decarbonisation is going on to the next stage. So moving away from liquid fuels and into gas fuels and measuring the efficiencies and the emission reduction benefits of using LPG and moving towards hydrogen. Okay, next slide, please. So we're testing power generators that are running on LPG, testing them on biomethane, testing them on glycerine, and testing them on, let's say, hydrogen. But there are other ways of really kind of managing the power on the sites to reduce the dependency on diesel power generators, or indeed to reduce the size of those generators, such as energy storage and energy capture solutions, but also power management systems. And when you start to look at the current cost of diesel, we can't call it red diesel anymore out there, and you start looking at these alternative technologies, they very rapidly pay for themselves and continue to add that efficiency back into the site whilst reducing the emissions and reducing those occupational health risks to the workers on the sites. Next slide, please. So just to focus on another work package that we delivered with HS2 during the year last year, and this was looking at existing solutions that have been out there for the coach and buses, and looking at those latest engine technologies that are available and how they're managing to remove the emissions from the exhaust, and actually saying, well, can you then apply this to the older machinery? So when we're looking at some of the construction plant being used across the HS2 project, we're looking at, for instance, at piling rigs, where the elevated sections of this project will soak up to 90% of the UK fleet, much of which wouldn't meet the minimum emission standards that have been defined within the HS2 project. We needed to find a solution that didn't require full fleet renewal and would allow the project to deliver these components within the time schedules that have been set. So working with Balfour Beatty, we were able to take the oldest assets on their fleet, the most polluting machines that they had, and by retrofitting them with after exhaust technology, we were then able to produce the cleanest machines on their fleet, which not only allowed them to work on the HS2 project, but it opens up the doorway for the entire construction industry to start cleaning up its machines and reducing those emissions from the tailpipe. This was the first certified systems for the UK for non-road mobile machinery. So for those larger pieces of construction plant, it can be readily applied across multiple engine ranges and many different machines where that engine type is ripe for retrofit. And it's a very cost-effective way of reducing those carbon emissions. And all of this evidence that we're creating is being fed back into policy development through DEFRA and through BEIS with their hydrogen strategy, and looking forward as to really how do we have the most sustainable approach to not just replacing the current fleet and the whole embodied carbon cycle of recycling machines and producing new machines, and actually using what we've got as efficiently as possible. And then once we've got these understandings, we've got these the sort of the data sets, we can start to model and scale those solutions not only across the whole of the HS2 fleet, but across the whole of the UK non-road mobile machinery fleet, and then start to calculate what the benefits would be against the cost of delivering that change. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to hand back to Neil, and then look forward to any questions that you might have for us in the Q&A session after this presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And as you saw from some of those trials we're doing there, I mean, if everything HS2 started its early works program in 2016, 2017, at that point, everything we had on site was diesel, 100% diesel. And we've seen over the last sort of 5 years through our innovation program, through bringing on new pieces of equipment to test and then roll out, a dramatic change in every single one of our sites. This isn't just one pocket. All of the joint ventures have been implementing these things. So, for example, we started off with the hydrogen hybrid piece of excavator, or the really small pieces of electric equipment like telehandlers. And now today we have 3 250-ton electric cranes on our sites. We trialled at the moment the world's first electric piling rig. So we're now seeing the smaller equipment being rolled out as the new norm, and the bigger equipment having its first run out on our sites. We're also seeing hydrogen. As I said, we had the smaller equipment like tower lights, but now we've got a generator on site. We're going to have some dual fuel vehicles, and all the funding has been made available by BEIS from the hydrogen strategy and the red diesel replacement fund. There is that opportunity now for some of the companies that come to us and say, will you trial this, to get some additional funding to try and accelerate that further. So I think looking forward, it is a very exciting future, because there's a framework in place. We've all got the same aim, and if we work together a bit more proactively, we can really sort of accelerate that rollout of larger electric equipment and start. And the real big challenge now is getting that infrastructure and of green hydrogen manufactured, produced in the UK for use on construction and community projects as well. And that will certainly be the focus going forward. It'd be interesting in future events to come back and see how we're making progress against that. From a HS2 point of view, what's next for us? Well, of course, the core thing is all the commitments we've made to the communities of where our construction sites are. In the Code of Construction Practice, we've got that core commitment to manage the impacts of our construction, but also go beyond what are the environmental minimum requirements, which is some of the examples you've seen today about moving away, reducing emissions further. Also, can HS2 and other bodies actually drive policy change? HS2 requires non-road mobile machinery requirements. Other projects do. London does. Obviously, elsewhere it doesn't at the moment. I think the real opportunity is to work with the partners, whether it's other projects, other companies. And I guess the take-home message for the people watching this is, our door is open. Some of the examples you saw on the photographs I showed earlier was companies coming to us saying, I've got a great idea. We think it's going to work in construction. Shall we have a go? And we've placed it on one of our sites. And if it runs, then we've got the opportunity to get the likes of Daniel involved and prove that for the benefit of the whole construction industry. So if we can show it works on our sites and then roll it out for the rest of the industry. Okay, thank you for listening. We're ready to take some questions.
Neil and Daniel, thank you very much. It's a great presentation, and I think it demonstrates what happens when you operate at scale. And we had a similar presentation a little while ago where we had one of the world's largest steel manufacturers telling us about their ability to invest billions of pounds in new steel manufacturing capacity, which gives us a lot of confidence. And Neil, I was particularly intrigued by your sort of closing comments around your direction of travel going forward, and being aware that, say, for example, large manufacturers, people like JCB, are doing a huge amount of innovation in hydrogen and such like. Are you able to use the scale of your program to help them drive their own innovation programs, or are the two a little bit running in parallel?
Well, certainly that is the aim. I know. I mean, there's lots of manufacturers coming up with solutions at the moment.
Yes.
I know we've spoken to JCB as well. I know they've got bringing some hydrogen plant on hopefully later at the end of this year. And I've already said to them we want them to be on our construction site first. But yeah, certainly it is part of also one of the wider benefits of HS2 and the purchasing power of it. The scale of the construction site is the wider benefit it can bring to UK PLC as well, which of course is bringing those new solutions onto our sites. That's one of the reasons we're doing these innovation projects as well. If we can speed up what would have taken perhaps 2 or 3 years to take from prototype to real life solution, if we can speed that up, roll it out and show to the rest of the construction industry, look, this works. And by the way, we've brought the likes of Daniel in to do a study on it to prove it works, and then also supporting other UK manufacturers. And indeed, I spoke about the work that's happening with the Construction Leadership Council and the work we're doing there on eliminating diesel with their Construct Zero initiative. So JCB, for example, are a part of that work, as well as many of the OEMs and major suppliers in the UK. So that's where when I said about it's not about HS2 working in isolation. It's certainly not within government working in isolation. That's why we need to work with our arms length body partners, such as National Highways and Network Rail, so we don't just silo ourselves. But it's our contribution to the industry challenge, which is why it's important that we link in, for example, with diesel with the Construction Leadership Council and the other roadmaps, for example, the Green Building Council roadmap for low carbon concrete.
Now we've got a couple of questions about HVO, and Sarah Jolliffe is asking whether there are plans to introduce HVO biodiesel across phase one. But more specifically, Daniel Dietrich is referencing some challenges he's had on his programs at getting approval for use of HVO due to some concerns around sustainability credentials. So effectively, the reflection is, either with what your plans are, and in introducing those plans, have you faced challenges in introducing HVO as an alternative, and what have you done to get over those challenges?
Okay, so I can kick off this, then I'm sure Daniel will come in, because we asked Imperial to do a specific study around this for us. The first thing is HS2 Limited, as a company, won't buy any fuel at all. We delegate that choice to our contractors. It is the joint ventures that make the purchases for plant equipment, as they do for raw materials. However, we set the framework of requirements. HVO, or there's a series of brands available, isn't there? So biofuels, if I use that term, is used on HS2 today on a number of contractors. Some of them quite a lot, and others less. So there's a range of use at the moment. We asked Imperial to do a study on HVO to ask, that was specifically around the tailpipe emissions. Do they actually give a benefit from the exhaust emissions? What we've shown from that, and Dan can mention this himself, is there was no real difference from the machine stack, but of course there's this reported carbon saving of 80 odd to early 90%. What we have recommended to all of our contractors is that any fuels they use need to be certified by the Sustainable Fuel Accreditation Scheme. So ZEMO, for example, used to be Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, have got a scheme where they certify the fuels and audit the supply, because you say the critical negative is where is that fuel coming from. And so as long as it's sustainably certified, then we sort of allow the use. And if you look on the HS2 website, the air quality page, you'll see the case study and the link to Imperial's report of that study. Do you want to add anything, Daniel?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is really just to highlight how important it is that we actually do this independent sort of scientific studies to create that evidence, to give the industry the confidence to adopt new measures as they're coming through. As Neil mentioned, that report is available online from the HS2 website. And really the important thing around here is that sustainable sourcing of fuels. But also just to highlight that the evidence that we found really was that the fuels don't deliver the emission reductions that you'd get from using the cleanest available machinery. So at the moment with non-road mobile machinery, that's the stage 5 machinery, or moving towards that hybrid, electrification, gas engines, or even retrofitting older plants. So there's other solutions. I was talking in the presentation about stepping stones and that roadmap, and there's other solutions that are available now that will give a greater benefit, certainly on the local air quality area.
Okay, and thank you for that. And a follow-up question from Barry McDermott, which is again looking at benefits, but very much more on a cost equivalence basis. So, question is whether dual fuel and LPG trials, whether they were cost effective versus conventional diesel, and he says at 2022 prices. So I'm assuming that's post the removal of the red diesel rebate, but is there a cost effectiveness there?
Well, the dual fuel project is hydrogen, not liquid gas. So what we're doing this summer is as a first for construction, and this has been done elsewhere in the country, particularly in Scotland, I think in Aberdeen on their buses. We're retrofitting existing Euro 6 diesel HGVs, adding a second tank, which is hydrogen, and running them off the two, and you can flick in between the two. So again, the idea with that is it's a stepping stone to full hydrogen, a bit like hybrid electric is in the private car market. So that's the trial we're doing this year. The vehicles are being fitted out at the moment, and we haven't started that. But certainly the cost impact of that. I mean, I suspect now the cost of retrofitting needs to go through economies of scale before it's viable. But we're doing that to prove it works. It's a stepping stone to wider, to get use in the hydrogen sector. And we're doing that in the Birmingham area specifically because there's the hydrogen filling station now at the Science Park linked to Birmingham University. In relation to the, I think it was the Clean Air Gas Engine, which is an Innovate UK funded project that's just received further funding from the Red Diesel Replacement Challenge. That uses green bio-LPG. And correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, the price of that is significantly less, isn't it, than diesel?
Very, very cheap compared to diesel. Is it about 38p a litre, something like that? So it's considerably cheaper. Like that, yeah. But the other thing, you saw the photograph of the welfare unit. But the thing with that is the engine's only in use for a fraction of the time because one, it's got a solar roof, but it's also got heat recovery from the engine to warm the cabin, and it's got a battery fitted. So as the engine's running, it's also charging that. So the engine only runs for about a quarter of the time anyway, as opposed to what a diesel generator would run. So that is the price on that is cheaper, but you're also running it for a fraction of the time. That project's actually linked with Jaguar Land Rover, an example of supporting UK PLC again. And in the future, the car batteries from electric cars will go in, when they've got about 50% reduction, they can't be using the cars anymore. They'll go into the construction equipment because the batteries can still be used for that light. And the engines that will be used in the future will be the JLR diesel and petrol engines, which can't be used from 2030, converted and used in construction. So there's a circular economy element to that project as well.
Wow. That's a really interesting insight. Now, we are just about coming up to the end of the session. So we've got two questions, which I suggest we answer quite quickly. And I think, Daniel, this is one for you, I think. So Charlie Wedgwood has asked whether the NRMM retrofit is the technology a filter system or was it a complete engineer overhaul? So if you're just able to give that clarification.
It's a selective catalyst reduction and particulate filter that's been tailor-made to fit the individual machines, and made to work with the the engine mapping on those machines, so it works with the original engine manufacturer's software systems.
Right. Okay. Very clear. Thank you very
Hopefully
much.
that answers the question.
And yeah, no, I hope so. And finally for Neil, a question from Kevin Lomas. He's asking what range of renewable energy solutions you're using across all assets to deliver operational net zero. Now, I suspect you could take quite a long time answering that, so you probably need to just give some assurance around the range of some of the solutions you're using.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of trials on at the moment, but very quickly we have solar. You saw in the photograph some of the solar banks. A lot of our monitors are run off solar because they're in remote areas. Green hydrogen, where we can get hold of it, is in use across our site. We're of course using electricity on our site. So the tunnel boring machine, for example, are being run off electric tariff, which is zero carbon as well. And one of the real challenges for construction is to get the sites onto the mains. It takes an awful lot of time to get those connected, so it's a real issue. So get connected on site with renewable tariffs. That saves the need for these diesel generators. And of course, I talked about the Cage project there that's using solar as a roof as to part power it, and then has a backup with green bio LPG. Similarly, the other unit had the backup with green hydrogen.
Okay. Well, thank you both, Neil and Daniel. I think it's been a really brilliant session to bring the first day to a close, because you've demonstrated, firstly, really rapid progress in this area, and it's all been done with real examples rather than theory. So that's a fantastic way to finish. So it just, I think, is now for me to just bring this session to a close. And firstly, reflecting, it's great to have an opportunity to see Colin Mars, even if only virtually, the new editor of Construction News. So it's great to have the opportunity to meet him. I think it's very important that we recognise the great sort of support that Aggregate Industries and BAM Construction have provided in sponsoring this event today. So thank you for them, and particularly for the content, I think, from Aggregate Industries this afternoon. And I'm going to break my rule as a conference chair. I'm going to summarise with 4 points rather than 3, but I think that's my prerogative. And the first one, and I think very much reflecting on some of HS2's final presentation, is that they demonstrated that carbon management, as opposed to measurement, is a reality. And I think that sort of almost like neatly bookends all of the things that our various presenters were telling us about around sort of optioneering, measurement, benchmarking, and everything else. So I think all of that development in data that everybody's been talking about in terms of various, sort of product certificates and everything else is essential to meet what effectively will become client expectations. So that, I think, is a really important message that some clients are ahead of us. The second one, I think, was, and again, that came very strongly from both Aggregate Industries and ArcelorMittal, was that manufacturers, who ultimately they're the really big organizations in this game, are already investing ahead of their clients and their supply chain. So I think there's a sense there that the industry has to catch up in many ways with the products that that manufacturing industry is going to give us. And I thought some of that stuff, the foamcrete idea of reusing existing asphalt, was just fantastic. So again, that sense of clients and supply chain keeping up with the innovation from the manufacturing supply chain was a really strong message. I also, I took from, I think it was quite a few presentations, because let's face it, most of the presentations today were about concrete, cement, steel, and latterly diesel, that there are these big areas of carbon emissions that everybody has to address. And I just reflect on the sort of work that I did in embodied carbon measurement 10, 15 years ago. But actually, there are quite a lot of other areas where there's unexpectedly large amount of emissions. One I remember was raised floors, which are incredibly carbon intensive. So I think the idea of thinking, oh, so long as we fix the steel and the concrete and the diesel will be all right, I think is the wrong message. And we pretty much need to focus across the entire product portfolio to make sure that as a hard to decarbonize sector, that we've done everything we can. And finally, and I think this came throughout the whole session, that there's a really important role for clients, their contractors, their supply chain to champion adoption ahead of the kind of the standards that will come in later periods. So people have got to effectively step up to the plate, innovate, do things a little bit differently, and I think we've had some great examples of that. So on those four, what I hope are pretty bright and encouraging points, I'm going to close this session. There will be an opportunity to view some of the presentations again if you want to on an on-demand basis, but thank you very much for being a great audience. I would have liked to have had you in a room, but we can't do that. And I hope you enjoy tomorrow as well. So thank you and goodbye.